I would never claim to be an artist, more of a journeyman photographer. I never realised I had any style at all in my personal photography until a friend remarked that he always recognised my pictures because they made ordinary things look odd. I did recognise what he meant, but I'd never verbalised it. Style is an instinct, not something you learn, but something you gain if, like Genghis Khan and his brother Don, you just keep on keeping on, taking pictures whenever and wherever you can. It has nothing to do with cameras, everything to do with the mind, though a knowledge of photo technique will certainly oil the wheels. I heard a quote recently from the great jazz musician Miles Davis, one of the lights of my life. He had been asked what he thought was the most difficult thing about becoming a musician. His answer was pithy: playing like yourself. That remark is just as applicable to photography. No two trumpet players will ever sound exactly the same because of physical differences in their lung capacity, embouchure, interpretation of the written notes and so on. But two photographers, given the same camera pointed at the same scene, will produce effectively identical photographs. So how does a photographer photograph like him or herself? I suppose the most obvious way is by the choice of what to photograph. It's an obvious reflection of what is important to the individual. The trouble is that most of us, like our children, partners, moody landscapes, birds, cats, dogs, and other furry creatures, and it is hard to photograph these things in an individual way. Sure, you can make the pictures more striking by adding filters to them, grafting moody skies into landscapes and so on. But so many people jump on anything new that it soon degenerates into a cliché, the antithesis of being yourself, and certainly not art. The photographer records things, as opposed to the painter who, by dint of starting with a blank canvas, a brush and paints, is forced to some extent to interpret them as he sees them and as his materials and skills allow. So it is hard not to display some individuality. The way to becoming yourself as a photographer is to keep doing it, keep photographing what you want, how you want, and taking no notice of what others think. Wanting approval from others is basic to human nature, which is why Davis says that being yourself is the hardest thing. Photography as an art form is no different from any other. It is an individual revealing his or her perception to others. What is important is that you like your work and that it reflects something that you feel, something that most likely you couldn't express verbally. Photography doesn't have to be art. We've all seen more things through the medium of photography than we could ever have seen for ourselves. The enthusiast bird photographers, the landscape photographers, the street photographers, all who photograph for the love of it and the love of their subject are the backbone of photography. Are they making art? Is their work less valuable or affecting because it is a record rather than an interpretation? Given the staggering technical capabilities of modern photo equipment, I'd argue that an accurate rendering of our world can be so deeply affecting that it has no need of an artist's interpretation. On the other hand, some years ago I went to an exhibition of Polaroid instant shots by David Hockney at the Museum of Modern Art in Los Angeles. I wouldn't even try to argue that a Polaroid was of itself art, but when you saw what Hockney had done with them, you were in no two minds it was art of a high order. He would take Polaroids of hundreds of individual small parts of a scene and then assemble them into the whole scene on a canvas in the museum. It was as if he had dismantled the scene itself and reassembled it indoors. It was electrifying to see. It answered the hoary old question, is photography an art, in my mind for once and for all. Photography is an art when it is done by an artist. My take on most of photography as an art form is that it isn't a visual art at all. A photographer has more in common with a poet or a novelist than a painter, an observer and interpreter who can distill an action into one moment, Cartier-Bresson's decisive moment, the essence of meaning of whatever is unfolding. This picture of a blind boy distills what I consider photography as an art. The photographer, the late Magnum member and photojournalist Charles Harbert, expresses in one picture both how different the boy's life is from the viewer's and how much the same it is. We can see the shaft of sunlight, the boy can feel its warmth, perceived differently but a shared experience. So much said in just a glance at this picture, you would have to be one heck of a poet to say it so succinctly and movingly. There it is, my take on photography. Is it art? I've used my own photographs as illustrations, not because they are wonderful, they are not. But they are mine and I like them, and they do exhibit what I didn't know I had until a friend pointed it out, a style, of sorts. Photography has always been at the bottom of the arts heap. partly because of the widely held view that all you need to be a good photographer is a good camera, and partly because it is widely seen as a recording medium, summed up by the phrase, "the camera never lies." That phrase came from a Lincoln, Nebraska newspaper. As quoted, it is incomplete. Paraphrased, it says, "The camera cannot lie, but the photographer can." Thanks for watching.